Yo guys, today we're gonna look at the fourth case of the Great Ace Attorney Adventures. We're finally gonna get a closer look at Britain with the adventure of the Clouded Kokoro. Now, this case can be seen as filler, but I believe it has a purpose in the game. It's supposed to build the world of Britain. We get to learn about how deep the fog is and things like the window tax. We also get some focus on the people of Britain from the point of view of Soseki Natsume. Soseki Natsume is a fantastic character. He has a fun personality, but also shows us the difficulties of living abroad and gives us some more insight into the dark side of London with how he notices foreigners treating him poorly. Now, of course, some of Natsume's complaints against the British people might just be him overthinking and misinterpreting things, but once we see London for ourselves, we can't deny that what he says is true. Throughout the investigation and trial, we encountered various instances of racism towards the Japanese. This is yet again another way to develop this new world we're in. I'll save my thoughts about the racism for later, but for now, let's talk about the quality of the investigation. Now, the investigation can get boring. I do appreciate elements of the investigation, such as highlighting how hard police officers have to work, but this investigation just feeds into a bigger problem that this game seems to have. It's too long. The amount of times they repeat plot points like the hardworking officers is insane, and they really didn't have to do it that much. Now, another thing I want to touch on is a new location added. Holmes' suite. I do not like this place. For some reason, I almost always find the conversations in this room to be really boring, and it just tires me out. I've already talked about how I like the dynamic between Susato and Ryunosuke, but now the group size is increasing. We get introduced to Iris, and I'm not a big fan of her. There's nothing wrong with her, but I feel like she doesn't add much at all. Even Sholmes isn't that fun here. I did like him in the Speckled Band, but I found his dialogue tiring to get through in this case. For some reason, I'm just not a fan of the group dynamic when all four main characters are together. Luckily, there's a location that counters the boredom of Sholmes' suite. That location is Strongheart's chamber. Every time I go to this place, the game becomes really fun. We get many clues about what's going on in the story as we talk to Strongheart. This is the point where I became confident in my conclusions on certain things, like what's going on with the Grim Reaper and what's going on with Strongheart. Also, we learn more about what happened at the end of Case 3, and we learn that the Grim Reaper's curse did strike since McGilded was the person stuck in the omnibus. I also like how we come back to the fact that Strongheart said that the not guilty verdict was easy, even though we had to pull out a summation examination and our win was based on forged evidence that materialized in the middle of the case. Again, things like this just make you more curious, and I love how this beginning portion just gives you so many questions to work with. What's also interesting is that Strongheart actually questions us about Cosmo's goal, and that caught me by surprise. So in Case 3, it seemed as if he assumed we knew the goal, but he's clever and realizes that we may be in the dark, and the truth is, we are. So like I said, I don't have too much investment on a lot of the plot points in this case. I don't care about who arrested Natsume, I don't care about Tobias Gregson and his appearance in the Sherlock Holmes novels, and I don't care about the Garridebs all that much either. Now, that's not to say there isn't anything interesting here. It might sound like I hate this investigation, but that's not true. There are things I like. I like learning more about London, things like the window tax, and learning that having multiple maids was used to show other people that you were of a higher status was interesting. I also liked every conversation with Soseki, and the Strongheart portions as I talked about before, so there were good things here. Now, I want to talk about the dance of deduction in this investigation. I really liked the two dance of deductions in the Speckled Band. The first one was like a tutorial, and the second one changed up the gameplay and sped things up by giving us a lot of evidence prompts for the deductions. Now in Case 4, the dance of deduction feels really slow and boring. There's already a limitation to how the dance of deductions are structured. You have to listen to Sherlock saying his deductions twice. I'm not joking, you're going to hear the same dialogue repeated almost word for word 2 times. So yeah, I think the dance of deduction takes way too long, and they should be condensed to the point where you only hear Sherlock's thought processes once. It really messes with the pacing, and makes the investigation even more dragged out. Also, once you actually start fixing his deductions, all you do is find another object in the area. None of the variation in case 2 exists. The other thing that makes this boring to me is that at this point in the case, I really don't care what happened in the Gyarados room. By the end, I had no investment in this fight that the Gyarados had. Yeah, we know the case is gonna play a part in the crime, just because this is a game, but with so little information revealed about the mystery, it just felt like some random issue that I didn't care about at all. Overall, I'm indifferent to the investigation portion, but enough talking about the investigation, let's get into the trial. So this case is famous for many reasons. One of these reasons is the amount of crazy coincidences that take place. The first of these coincidences can be seen when one of the juror members seemingly has a part to play in the case. I remember when I first saw this, and I thought it was the dumbest thing ever because it's the craziest coincidence that the juror that got selected was in a green coat and fell near the same area that the victim did. Thankfully, I think this is totally fine because we soon learned that the whole incident with the old man didn't matter at all. So yeah, I'm really not mad about that. Obviously, there's the other coincidence of Miss Gerda being there too, but that doesn't really matter too much. Like, it really doesn't matter if she's a part of the jury or if she wasn't. I don't think that affects the case in any way. Taking everything into consideration, there's only one part of the mystery that's shaky to me, and that part comes at the very end. The whole thing about the broken knife being able to stab through the victim's coat is what's hard to believe. A big part of these cases are the decisive piece of evidence, and while I was playing this case, I was thinking to myself, surely the decisive piece of evidence can't be the broken knife tip, right? There's no way that would have stabbed through Olive Green and her coat and left her unconscious. That was my thought process anyway, and it turns out the broken tip was that final piece of evidence. What's funny is, Takumi's thought process was to make the victim more stocky and make the coat very thick so that she could live after the knife plunged her in the back. So it's interesting how we had different thought processes regarding what would happen with the knife trick. In my head, the knife would sort of spin in the air, lose some force, and not be able to plunge into the victim's back, but I'll be perfectly honest, I don't know what would realistically happen. Let's assume the knife trick was impossible. Even if it was completely impossible, I wouldn't really care because I can understand why Takumi thinks that would work. So either way, I'm fine with the knife trick in the end. Of course, there are many other coincidences, but at least all of them have good explanations. Like the book and knife being thrown out the window has a good explanation. It's because Mr. and Mrs. Gyardab were fighting, and Mr. Gyardab had his back towards the window. There's also the coincidence of Rolly discovering the crime right where his beat ends, but that explains why he moved the body to the other side of the road. So yeah, there are a lot of coincidences, but at least there's a good explanation for how all these coincidences came together to form this accident. Now, if all these coincidences happened, and it was a part of Miss Gyardab's plan, that would be horrible. Thankfully, it was just an accident, which makes the mystery a lot better. Now, the main problem with the trial is again, the pacing. This trial goes on for way too long for how simple the mystery is. This case shares problems with episode 1 in the fact that there are so many moments where Ryunosuke thinks he's doomed, and he goes on about how he can't win the trial, and then Susato talks about how they still have a chance, and again, these type of conversations happen so much and take quite a bit of time, which definitely bogs the case down. In general, there are just really long periods of time between cross-examinations. Thankfully, I find the dialogue in between to be fun enough to where I'm not bothered. There definitely are a lot of good things going on here with the characters. I do like Patricia and Rolly. Patricia's antics are interesting because it looks like she's evil as she sort of controls Rolly, but by the end, she doesn't do anything wrong at all as far as the mystery of the case goes. I also think her insistence that Rolly is a noble man who can do nothing wrong creates an interesting dynamic when we end up learning that he messed with the scene of the crime. I think the reveal that Rolly messed up the scene is the best part of the entire case because of how it's written. All the jurors are shocked. Patricia is shocked, and Rolly is filled with guilt as he explains how unfortunate the situation was. It also creates a good moment for Van Zieks when he sympathizes with Rolly and gives him a second chance. This moment uses everyone in the courtroom to create an impactful moment, which I really liked. I also do like how we get to learn more about the lives of the jurors. It shows us what the life of normal Londoners look like, and it creates some fun filler conversation in the trial. Now, let's address the elephant in the room. Whenever anyone talks about Case 4, racism gets mentioned. There has been racism throughout the game, but I guess this is where it becomes more prominent. What's my stance on the racism? Well, I think it makes the game better. Now, before you go around and start calling me racist, hear me out. As I said before, my first experience with the game was through the fan translation. Now, I didn't remember it at the time, but according to many people, the fan translation was much more extreme when it came to the racism. And apparently, that's how the Japanese release was as well. So Scarlet Study had a more faithful translation compared to the official English release, which toned down the racism. Now, what's interesting is I had two favorite cases from this game when I finished watching the fan translation. The first time I saw Case 3, I wasn't thinking too much about the logic and the mystery behind everything, and all the other elements of the case really left a lot of impact on me, making it one of my favorites. But the other case tied with the runaway room as my favorite in this game was Case 4. And one of the big factors that made me fall in love with this case so much was the strong desire to defend Soseki. And I reflected upon that after beating this case during my playthrough of the official translation. Why did I want to win the case so badly back then when I didn't care too much now? And then it hit me. It's probably the racism. The characters in the fan translation were such trashy human beings that I could feel Soseki's struggles a lot more. Like when he described how he felt like the British was mocking him and making fun of him. I could probably understand that struggle more in the fan translation because in the official translation, the racism is just much more tame. Just because characters are racist doesn't mean the game is automatically a worse game. If used properly, it can be better, and I think that's something the fan translation did well. Not only is the racism toned down, but even other insults are. Take Patricia Beat as an example. Let's compare a description of Olive Green and Soseki in the fan translation and the official translation. As you can see, it completely changes her character. The fan translation depicts her as a foul-mouthed person constantly insulting people while she goes on about how great her husband is, while the official translation takes a lot of that character away from her. I personally like Patricia in the fan translation more since you can get a stronger reaction out of the player. So yeah, those are my thoughts on the racism in this game and why I think it makes this case stronger. There's also another big topic discussed, and that's the relationship of the Gyarados. Miss Gyarados abuses Mr. Gyarados a lot, and that pisses off fans. For me personally, it's not something that gets me mad at all. It feels like the game took a comical angle with it, and I didn't find it too funny. I think the only part I found funny was the tea pouring animation. It also came into play when Miss Gyarados wanted Mr. Gyarados to stop talking about what happened during the time of the crime, so I thought the gimmick was used well. But yeah, I just don't see a huge problem with it. I mean, we had an entire game where the prosecutor just whipped everyone in court, so I don't know why this is a big issue now. I generally don't take issues that are very serious in real life that seriously at all in a game like Ace Attorney if it's just played for laughs. I will say it is nice at the end when Miss Gyarados realizes that she shouldn't have gotten angry in the first place and how it's her fault even if it was an accident. I think the Clouded Kokoro does a good job with its two couples in general. You got two very flawed couples and they mostly realize their mistakes by the end, so I think it's good story-wise. Now finally, I want to talk about the loose ends, because there are many loose ends in this case, and this is very intentional on the game's part. Now there have been many loose ends in case 1 to 3, but it's more of a surprise here because the Clouded Kokoro seems like that filler case. We got all these random people, Patricia, Rolly, the Gyarados, and Soseki. All these characters just seem unimportant in a random accidental murder But then you start to think about things like the victim. They literally say that they don't know for certain if the victim's name is actually Olive Green. The victim's still in a coma, so we never get to talk to her. It's a very interesting loose thread that makes you wonder what the purpose of this is. Then you also got the two new characters who never even got a name. We got the guy who says random lines from Hamlet, and some other guy who gets annoyed by it. We also learned that the Hamlet guy lives on the ground floor of the Garrett's apartment, and there's also this plot point of the Garrett's being able to see the every move of Soseki and the Hamlet guy, which never gets touched on again. So it just leaves a lot of intrigue as to what they will do with these points in the future. This could also connect to Soseki's fears of his room being haunted, but again, this is left unresolved. This makes for a shocking end when you beat the entire game, because you realize that these things don't get mentioned in Case 5 at all. All of these lingering threads are left for the second game, which is very unique, and it is something I really like. So overall, the episode's good. Again, the pacing is the biggest problem, but the writing saves the episode for me, and actually makes it quite enjoyable. Overall, this one gets a 7 out of 10. I'm gonna throw this one above the Runaway Room, but below Samurai. It's actually quite hard to say which one I like more. I don't know if I like the Clouded Kokoro more, or the Runaway Room more. I'll just put it here for now, but that could change. For now though, we are done with this review, and next time, we will finish the Great Ace Attorney Adventures with the adventure of the Unspeakable Story. See you guys then.